I want you to close your eyes for just a second and visualize a really specific scene. It's early morning in Mumbai, India. The air is, it's already thick with humidity. The traffic is just starting to snarl. It's that completely chaotic, vibrant sensory overload the city is famous for.
Right, yeah.
And jogging right through the thick of it, dodging the yellow and black tuk-tuks and all the pedestrians, is a sitting G7 president.
Which is definitely not the image you usually associate with high-level global diplomacy. Usually these guys are, sealed inside some beast of a limousine with tinted windows.
10-car motorcade, the whole thing.
Exactly.
But here's Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, literally sweating it out on the street. He's breaking security protocol just to feel the pulse of India. And we're starting here today because that image, that willingness to just jump right into the fray, is actually the perfect metaphor for the source material we're diving into.
Yeah, we are looking at a very rare long-form interview that President Macron gave to the Indian podcaster Raj Shamani. And honestly, calling it just an interview feels like a bit of an undersell.
It really does. It doesn't feel like a press conference with, pre-approved talking points where he's just dodging every tough question. It feels more like a survival guide.
That is a great way to put it. It's a really raw, surprisingly honest look at how a historic European power is trying to figure out if it still matters.
Yeah.
Because we are looking at a future that is increasingly dominated by the US and China.
And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive. We are going to unpack Macron's blueprint for keeping France, and really by extension Europe, relevant. We've organized this into 3 distinct pillars that he lays out in the discussion.
Right.
First, we have the tech deficit, basically why Europe fell behind, and this incredibly risky moonshot plan to catch up.
Then we'll move to the geopolitics of it all. We'll break down this concept of strategic autonomy, which it sounds really dry, but it's actually just a fancy way of saying he refuses to pick a side in the global playground fight between America and China.
And finally, the soft power pitch. How do you convince the next generation of genius engineers from places like India to just ignore Silicon Valley and move to Paris instead?
And you will definitely want to stick around for the end, because there is a moment where Macron discusses his biggest fear for the future. It's dark, it's very urgent, and it involves what he calls 19th century wars.
It's heavy stuff for sure. But let's start with the immediate crisis. Technology. Macron starts this whole conversation with a confession that I actually found pretty brutal for a national leader. He does not sugarcoat it.
No, it was essentially an admission of failure. He flat out acknowledges that while France and Europe were the pioneers of the earlier industrial revolutions, aviation, high-speed trains, nuclear power, they completely missed the boat on the digital revolution.
He looks at the leaderboard today, and it's basically just all American and Chinese flags.
Yeah, and to twist the knife a little bit further, he notes that many of those American companies are actually run by CEOs of Indian origin, or they're built by European engineers who just left.
A total brain drain.
A brain drain and a capital drain. He's looking at a Europe that consumes tech but doesn't produce the platforms that run the modern world.
So he admits the patient is sick. But what is the diagnosis? Because he doesn't just sit there and say, we messed up. He breaks it down into 3 really specific structural failures that explain why Europe lagged.
Right. He argues it's not that Europeans aren't smart enough. He says the real killers are scale, capital, and risk.
Let's tackle scale first. Because if you look at a map, Europe looks huge. It's got 450 million people. That is a bigger market than the US. So why does he say they lack scale?
Because in theory, yes, the population is totally there. But in practice, it's completely fragmented.
How so?
Well, if you launch a startup in San Francisco, you instantly have access to 330 million people who speak the exact same language, use the same currency, and follow the same federal regulations. If you launch that same startup in Paris, you have to navigate 27 different legal systems, languages, and cultural barriers just to reach that same scale.
That sounds like a nightmare for a young company.
It is. Macron is obsessed with fixing this. He wants to create a true digital single market, but he readily admits they just aren't there yet.
Okay, so the playing field is bumpy. What about the fuel? The capital issue?
This is a fascinating point because it goes totally against the stereotype that Europe is economically struggling. Macron points out that Europe actually has more savings than the United States.
Wait, really? More savings?
Yes, Europeans are incredible savers.
Yeah.
But the problem is that money is sleeping. It just sits in low-risk bank accounts, government bonds, or life insurance. It's entirely passive.
whereas in the U.S.
In the U.S., a huge chunk of household savings goes straight into the stock market, venture capital, high-risk assets.
So American grandmas are accidentally funding the next AI startup through their pension funds, while European money is just gathering dust in a vault.
That's the crux of it. And Macron points out that because of very strict regulations, rules that were meant to protect everyday people, European institutional investors are often completely blocked from investing in risky asset classes like venture capital.
So you have this paradox. Europe has the money, but it can't deploy it to the innovators.
Exactly. So the innovators just go to America to raise funds, and all the value is created over there instead.
Which brings us to the third hurdle, and maybe the hardest one to clear, the risk culture.
The psychological barrier. In Silicon Valley, if you crash a company, it's almost a badge of honor. It shows you tried, you learned something. In Europe, bankruptcy is a scarlet letter. It follows you around. Macron says explicitly that Europe has lost its appetite for risk.
He had that great line about innovation in the interview that really struck me. He said, "You don't decide to win."
It's a very profound point for a politician to make. He says innovation isn't a straight line where you put a coin in a slot and get a prize out. To get a moonshot, a massive, world-changing breakthrough, you have to accept that you will lose your investment 8 times just to win on the 9th.
Right.
And he is trying to rewire the entire French national psyche to accept that losing money is just part of the process.
That is a tough sell for an elected official. Vote for me, I'll lose your money 8 times before I get it right.
It is definitely not a great bumper sticker. But he's putting his money where his mouth is, or rather, the state's money. He talks about a massive 109 billion euro investment plan for AI and tech infrastructure.
But this is where the interview actually got a little spicy. The interviewer, Raj, pushed him on where that money is really coming from. He pointed out that out of the supposedly sovereign AI funding, about 50 billion euros is actually coming from the UAE.
It's a very valid critique. If you are taking billions from the Middle East to build your sovereign tech, are you really sovereign?
And if you're buying thousands of NVIDIA chips from America to power it, are you really independent?
Macron's answer here is a real masterclass in pragmatism. He basically says, look, we are late. We don't have the chips yet. We don't have the cloud giants yet. So if we demand absolute purity, made in France, funded by France, we will just have nothing. We'll be nothing but consumers.
So his strategy is take the foreign money, buy the American chips, but bolt them to the floor in Paris.
Exactly. He argues that sovereignty in the modern age isn't about isolation or autarky. It's about jurisdiction. If the data center is physically located in Marseille, even if it's built with UAE cash and runs American chips, it operates under European law. The data of French citizens is protected by their own regulations.
It's a stopgap measure. If you can't beat them, make them host their servers at your house.
While you secretly build your own weapons in the basement.
And that secret weapon is quantum computing.
That's the moonshot. When asked for his one big bet for 2035, he didn't hesitate for a second. Quantum.
Why is he so confident there? Europe missed the internet, they missed social media, they missed the cloud. Why are they going to catch the quantum wave?
Because quantum computing is deeply rooted in physics and pure mathematics. And if there is one thing France has historically dominated, it's math. They have the Fields Medal winners, they have the advanced labs. Macron believes this is a hardware and science game, not just a consumer software game.
That plays right to France's traditional strengths.
Precisely. He thinks they can leapfrog the current tech giants because the entire technological paradigm is about to shift.
So the plan is fix the capital markets to wake up the sleeping money, import the infrastructure for now, and bet the farm on quantum for the future. But all of this technological maneuvering is happening against a backdrop of a very messy world.
Which brings us to pillar number 2, geopolitics.
This is where the phrase strategic autonomy comes in. You hear this a lot in European policy circles, but Macron defines it very clearly in this interview.
He seems very resistant to this whole idea of a bipolar world. He hates it. The prevailing narrative right now is that there are 2 teams, Team USA and Team China. Everyone else just has to put on a jersey and pick a side. Macron, and this is why he aligns so closely with India in this conversation, is saying no, we want a third way.
Is this just neutrality?
Yeah.
Is he saying France wants to be like Switzerland?
No, it's much more active than that. Neutrality is staying out of it completely. Strategic autonomy is engaging with everyone, but strictly on your own terms. He says, I am an ally of the U.S., but I don't want to be a vassal. He wants to be able to talk to China, trade with India, and cooperate with Brazil without having to ask Washington for permission first.
That distinction feels incredibly relevant given the specific conversation they had about Donald Trump.
It definitely got a bit uncomfortable there.
Yeah. The interviewer brought up the fact that Trump, during his presidency, shared Macron's private text messages and threatened tariffs on French wine. He basically asked Macron, how do you deal with an ally who treats you like that? Should the world be scared?
And notice Macron's pivot. He refused to trash Trump personally. He zoomed out instead. He said that leadership requires respect, and that when democracies start using hate or violating privacy, they are going backward.
He essentially called the behavior uncivilized without actually using the word.
Precisely. But the subtext was very clear. The United States can be erratic. You cannot outsource your security or your economy to a country that might elect a leader who tweets your private secrets or starts a trade war on a whim. That unreliability is the strongest argument for European autonomy.
And this is exactly where the romance with India comes in. He sees India as a fellow traveler on this third way.
He was incredibly complimentary of India throughout the interview, and not just the usual diplomatic fluff where you say it's a great country with great food.
Yeah.
He was highly specific. He raved about the UPI system, the Unified Payments Interface.
He seemed genuinely jealous of it.
He should be. He noted that India managed to bring hundreds of millions of unbanked people into the digital economy in just a few years. Europe, with all its wealth, still has a totally fragmented payment landscape. He sees India as a country that leapfrogged the legacy systems because they didn't have the heavy baggage of the old banking institutions.
He also threw out a staggering statistic. India produces more engineers every year than the US and Europe combined.
Which frames India not just as a market to sell fighter jets to, but as a crucial resource, a true partner in this third way. And a key part of that partnership is financial independence from the dollar.
The de-dollarization topic. This is something that usually gets people either very excited or terrified.
He takes a very realist approach here. He knows the US dollar is the undisputed king of the hill today. But he argues that for true sovereignty, Europe needs to make the euro a viable alternative reserve currency. He talks about swap lines and ensuring global liquidity. It gets a bit technical, but the core goal is simple. If the US decides to weaponize the dollar, say, by sanctioning countries that Europe wants to trade with, Europe needs a functional workaround.
It sounds like he's trying to build an insurance policy for the entire continent.
That is exactly what it is. He doesn't want to destroy the dollar. He just wants to make sure Europe doesn't suffocate if the dollar supply is suddenly cut off.
Okay, so we have the tech catch-up plan, and we have the geopolitical independence plan. But plans require people. And France's population is aging, and the US is currently sucking up all the top global talent. Who is going to build these quantum computers?
This was the third pillar, the pitch. The global war for talent.
Macron was very specific about his numbers here. He wants to triple the number of Indian students in France, moving from roughly 9,000 up to 30,000 immediately.
And he had to bust a massive myth to make that pitch even sound plausible. The language barrier.
I think that is the #1 reason people don't even consider France. They think, I don't speak French, so I can't go to university there. I will just go to the UK or Canada.
Macron was emphatic on this point. He said the language is clearly English. He clarified that for master's programs, business schools, and advanced engineering, the curriculum is entirely in English now. You can survive and thrive academically without knowing a single word of French initially.
But then he pivoted to why you should actually choose France over, say, Stanford or MIT. And he didn't try to out-tech the US, he tried to out-culture them.
The French taste argument, I found this to be the most compelling part of his entire sales pitch. He argues that we are entering an era where raw computing power is basically becoming a commodity. Soon, everyone will have AI, everyone will have fast chips.
So what becomes the differentiator?
The unique nexus. He says France offers the intersection of deep tech with deep culture. You have brilliant mathematicians sitting right next to high-end fashion designers. You have AI researchers having coffee with world-class filmmakers.
He mentions Station F in Paris, which is this massive, vibrant startup campus.
Right. His core argument is that the next generation of massive global companies won't just be about raw efficiency. They will be about experience, design, and creativity. And France has a legacy in luxury, gastronomy, and art that Silicon Valley just simply does not possess.
It's basically the Steve Jobs concept of liberal arts married to technology, but applied on a national scale.
Exactly. He is telling young Indian engineers to go to America if they want to be a cog in a massive tech machine.
Yeah.
But come to France if you want to be a creator who actually understands how to live well.
Come for the quantum physics, stay for the croissants and the lifestyle.
It is a highly seductive pitch, and frankly, it's the only card he can really play because he cannot outpay the American tech giants in raw salary. He has to sell the quality of life and the art of living.
So we've covered all the hopeful stuff, the ambition, the new partnerships, the cultural renaissance. But as the interview wrapped up, the tone shifted noticeably. It got much darker.
It did. The optimism section was quite brief. He believes global education will eventually solve climate change because we will have billions of educated brains working on the problem together. But his fear section was detailed and highly specific.
He talked about the collapse of the rules-based order. And he used this phrase that really stuck with me, 19th century wars. What did he mean by that?
He is referring directly to the Russia-Ukraine war. For a long time, the general consensus was that the 21st century was post-territorial. We thought future conflicts would be cyber or economic or ideological.
We thought we were done with tanks rolling across borders just to steal land.
Right. A 19th century war is a colonial war. It is about empire and physical territory. Macron is terrified that if Russia succeeds, it resets the global clock. It tells the world that might makes right again, that borders are just suggestions if you have a big enough army.
He sounded genuinely worried about the normalization of violence.
He is. He sees the security frameworks established after World War II, the UN, the various treaties crumbling before our eyes, and he sees a world rearming itself at a terrifying pace. He worries that we are sleepwalking right back into a world where only raw force matters.
And this urgency really explains his energy throughout the interview. The podcaster pointed out he only has about 15 months left in his presidential term. He asked him point blank, "Are you scared you won't finish?"
And Macron said, "No, it energizes me." He calls it being in action mode. You get the sense of a man who knows the clock is ticking and is trying to shove a decade's worth of reform into a single year. He wants to make these changes, the massive AI investment, the push for European sovereignty irreversible before he leaves office.
Because he knows that depending on who comes next, it could all be undone.
That is the ultimate risk. He wants to lock in the trajectory now.
So, to synthesize all of this, we have a French president who is desperately trying to wake a sleeping giant. He's trying to turn Europe's passive savings into high-risk venture capital. He is trying to build a geopolitical lane that isn't totally dependent on Washington or Beijing. And he is trying to woo the world's top talent with a promise of tech meets taste.
It is incredibly ambitious. It is arguably the most coherent vision for Europe's future that anyone has put forward recently. But it is also incredibly fragile. It relies on massive cultural shifts that usually take generations, and he is trying to execute them in mere months.
It is a very French approach, highly intellectual, grand in scale, and slightly paradoxical.
It really is.
And speaking of trying to change the culture,
Yeah.
I have to mention the funniest moment of the entire interview. The interviewer brought up a past speech where Macron tried to sound like a Texan oil tycoon.
Plug, baby, plug.
Can you imagine a refined French intellectual shouting "plug, baby, plug" about energy policy?
It was his attempt to be modern and relatable. It shows he is desperate to break that stiff, bureaucratic European mold. He wants to show that Europe can have that raw American-style energy too.
Even if it sounds a little awkward coming out of his mouth.
He definitely gets an A for effort on that one.
Absolutely. So here is the thought we want to leave you with today. It is the paradox sitting right at the heart of Macron's entire strategy.
We talked heavily about sovereignty today, but Macron argues that to be truly sovereign, to actually control your own destiny, you have to be willing to accept foreign money, use foreign ships, and speak a foreign language in your universities.
It raises a massive question for the modern era. Can you buy your freedom using someone else's tools? Is that the ultimate pragmatism, or is it a contradiction that will eventually collapse on itself?
That is the multi-billion-euro question.
Think about that the next time you hear a politician talk about true independence. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We will catch you on the next one.